Welcome to the Call to Action podcast, where we bring you incredible people and even more incredible stories with discussions and topics about what it takes to sacrifice everything to overcome hardships and failures to achieve success. Our guests heard the call. Now it's your turn.
When we were in the throes of the power set story, I saw it as a failure, and I still see it as a failure. We were trying to be the company that beat Google. I deeply respected Google. I wanted to build a search engine. I wanted to build a big company. That's what I want to do. I don't want to sell companies. I want to build a big company, and I want to create my own culture. I want to revolutionize, how people think about companies and products. The fact that we sold Microsoft for $100 million should be told to other founders as a failure story, because it was. We failed to raise financing. We didn't have enough money to actually build an index large enough to be a legitimate search engine. We only built enough to actually index Wikipedia, and then we ran out of money. So we succeeded in building a search engine that was more accurate than Google for a certain type of searches, for natural language searches. But we failed to actually build a company that did what our dreams were. And we had to sell it to Microsoft because they were the only company that had enough money to actually fund it, because it cost so damn much to do the method that we had. And the story of the end of PowerSet, where we eventually sold to Microsoft, is not a joyous story. It was a rough story. And there were moments in it that were beautiful, and there were moments in it that were horrible. I was very much, Barney and I were at each other's throats at the end. Lorenzo felt caught in the middle between me and Barney, and that wasn't fun for him. We had Peter Thiel on our board and Charles Moldau on our board, and I'm not even sure if those two ever talked, and it was the right thing to do to sell to Microsoft, to build a search engine that now does help billions of people. Microsoft did a great job in making sure they treated the employees of PowerSet really good, but it felt like hell when we were going through it, because we wanted to build a big company. We wanted to build our own culture, our own company, our own thing. And so it's wildly kind of weird. Like so many people come to me and I get asked to speak, or I go to a couple events where my friends are like, "Oh, there's the founder of Bing." And I'm like, don't ever fucking call me that, because I was a co-founder of PowerSet. Yeah. And that's what I'm proud of. I'm proud of what we did there, but I did not create Bing. And I am proud of what Microsoft did, and how they treated the team and what they eventually did. I don't think they used as much of what we could have as we could have done had we built it ourselves and gone on our own. But this notion that founders throw parties when they sell the company, and it's all I think founders who want to flip companies act that way. Right. But founders who care deeply and passionately about what they're building, I went through a very tough time during when we were contemplating it, and afterwards. It was a very rough moment for me. So yeah, when you're a founder and you're beginning to talk about selling your company, it's weird. You feel like you're selling out your team, is what it in a way, because you're looking around at everybody do they want to work for Microsoft? A couple of these people have said some negative things about Microsoft over the years. I'm not, and then Yahoo's also was bidding on us, and Google was kind of maybe thinking about it. And I'm just and I'm look around, I'm I don't think there was a single PC in the office.
Oh my God.
And yeah.
Poor Microsoft.
Yeah.
Still that way today. I've always wondered, in a large acquisition, how much do founders actually walk away with at the end of the scenario like PowerSet? You don't need to give exact amounts, but there has to be a lot of hands to grease before it's off to the real estate agent for that oceanfront mansion.
Yeah. I think the answer with anything like that is it depends. So if it's your first startup versus your fifth, on your fifth startup, you're going to be a lot more savvy about, protecting your equity maybe a little bit more, how you raise money. You can do it more carefully. And then it depends on how much success you have in any given startup. So if you blow it out of the water right away, you're gonna have higher valuations, less dilution, so you'll retain more. So I've heard of founders that have more than 50%, when they sell. I've heard of founders that have fucking nothing. PowerSet wasn't my first company, and it wasn't famous. And so, just to give people a sense, at the same stage that Famous is in, as PowerSet was in, if I went, if I normalized the time frames of, the stages of the company, I have 5 times more equity in Famous than I did in PowerSet, but I had a pretty good equity stake in PowerSet, not spectacular.
So after that goes down, most people would probably be wondering why you'd be in a bit of a fit of depression, it sounds like, after that happened. You went on to write about an essay called Cult Creation. Can you talk us through where your mind was and what the reason was writing about that scenario?
Yeah, I think that having closure is really important. And so while we were in St. Martin, and I only spoke stench, so I was by myself for quite a bit because I really couldn't talk to anybody. So I decided to write down all the lessons that I learned. I had some great teachers during the time of PowerSet. Peter Thiel, who, is, can be polarizing in some of his views, but is also brilliant. So I tried to take the good things I learned from Peter. I learned from a little bit Luke Nosek, Kenny Oury, and the people at Founders Fund. Things I learned from Bill Keating, and really try to codify them in an essay. And so I wrote that Cult Creation essay in I think it was 1 or 2 beach sittings. I wrote it on the beach in St. Martin, and then I just posted it for myself on my blog that had exactly 0 followers. And it was the only thing on my blog. And I just posted it just to, like when you write a letter to yourself, it was like that. I just wanted to write down, like, I did learn something, I did accomplish something, it wasn't a complete failure. I will learn from these things and I will rebuild and I will start again. And I posted it, and then like the next day, people started sending me emails like going, "Oh my God, your essay's blowing up." And I'm like, huh? And it was #1 on Hacker News, and it stayed #1 for like 2 weeks.
That's
and next thing you know, I'm like, I remembered Vinod Khosla called me. He's like, "Steve, I would like to talk to you about your these cult you are trying to create. What are you doing?" And I'm like, that's my terrible impersonation.
I'll give it to you.
That's not what he sounds like at all. I try to make him sound, important, and then I completely fail. And this essay just took off, and all it was is like I'd spend a paragraph talking about a lesson learned and what was the scenario in which I learned it, and said I wrote it for myself, and it ended up a lot of founders read it and said, "Hey, this is like very truth-talking sort of stuff," and it has lots of spelling errors and mistakes. And then I rewrote it recently, and there's both versions now in my Medium account.
I personally think it's the only startup playbook an entrepreneur needs to read to really, if they're in the passionate, they're not the flip entrepreneur, but they're the passionate one that really wants to see this thing through to the end. I honestly think, because we both read it, and it sends, there's certain moments when it just sends chills up your spine. It's just so real and raw, and I really appreciate you writing that.
Yeah, I learned a lot from, because I had lots of anxiety when I wrote it. I was literally panic attacking.
You can feel the rawness in the sentences. It's truly amazing.
As I do with a lot of things, I turned that into a positive, I guess. So there's something that I do now that's really weird. I have anxiety or panic. Everybody has fear of something, right?
Yeah.
I have fear of flying. So sitting on the tarmac is like where I'm like losing my shit. And that's different than shitting Twinkies. This is just literally losing your shit. And I now, on purpose, so I'm always been a writer to myself. I always write letters to myself, like the cult creation. And now, every time I'm on the tarmac and I'm having an anxiety attack, I write an essay to myself about a topic. And the writing you get when you do that. So I have a whole book of shit I've written to myself. And
They should be called On the Tarmac.
Titled. The title I have of that notes is called Defective. And you know, if you can actually put yourself in a panic-inducing moment and then write an essay, it's an amazing thing to do. I don't, do it carefully, but that's when some real fucking honesty comes out.
Oh yeah. I'm from Sedona, Arizona, and I've seen my fair share of the wrong kind of cults growing up. Mm-hmm. How have you been able to hire a cult-like team? In the traditional sense, a cult is where an individual or group pretty much gives the founder or the leader all of their possessions, whereas they buy in that way. Whereas here, you're creating a culture where you're paying them to also be a part of it. And in the traditional sense, I think that coincides a little bit with the theology, but you've managed to create some really badass teams throughout your career. Can you talk us through how to create the ride or die member while also paying them to be a part of it? I think there's some dichotomy there. I'm very interested to learn about.
I think that culture emanates from the founder. So if I am anxious, my team will be anxious. If I lie to myself, the team will know that. If I'm vicious and abusive, it will affect the team, and they will be vicious and abusive right down the line. And I have It is incredibly important for everybody that's listening to this podcast to know that I have absolutely fucked up 9 out of 10 times in attempting to create a culture. It's just that every once in a while I find a gem and I keep it. And then I make mistakes every day in culture-related things. But I've learned that culture starts on day one. And if you can codify it and actually put action to words, like I don't know if you guys are listening to Ben Horowitz or the new stuff he's saying, where your culture is what you do, not what you say. And I live by that. And so if I've learned to not just use words like, oh, we value trust, or we value, empathy. That's a favorite one of the day. We actually codify it into things that are empathetic, things that are trustworthy types of things. So when we say, like, we treat our engineers differently, it's not words. We actually pay our engineers commission at Famous. We don't pay salespeople commission. We pay the people who built the fucking product the commission. Amen. When we say, oh, it's tough to live in the city, it's expensive. We don't just say that. We created the first living wage in startups. And no matter what your level is or what the market rate is for your salary, we never pay anything other than 20% above poverty, even when every other startup in the Valley is paying office managers and QA people and junior marketing people, even sometimes well below poverty. So I make sure that we never, ever, ever have a cultural word that's just a word. We always have to put action right next to it. And so there's examples of that in every day of every walk of everything that exists in the side of Famous.
Which brings us to the latest and greatest evolution of Steve Newcomb. Can you tell our listeners how the road to Famous began and how you and your co-founder Mark Liu came up with the idea to build a digital design studio?
I think Famous began with a lot of fuzziness. So when I go to create a company, there has to be a bunch of things that are true for me to say, like, I want to go do this thing. And I think the first starts with passion and like, what am I passionate about? What can, the pain minus meaning equals anxiety. How do I make sure I have meaning to be able to go through all that pain and not have too much anxiety? And what I do is I sit down and say, like, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about music. I'm passionate about design. I'm passionate about art. It's usually somewhere in the artistic field now. And this is like the fifth incantation of Steve. I was also passionate about search and voice recognition and things like that. But now it's mostly artistic type things. But within that field, there's lots of things you can do within design or art or music. And I start with passion, but then I go to logic real quick. So I reverse engineered it. I learned a lot through the Breakfast Club. So you go right back to those days. And I'm like, well, let's see. Here's a simple equation. I need money. Other people have it. Do they want to give it to me? And how do I put myself in a position where they want to give it to me? So say, I went out there and I said, well, I like music and I like design. I like photography. I like lots of areas of art. And I have lots of relationships with VCs because I simply did this Breakfast Club thing years ago. And then I started startups. So I had amassed relationships enough to simply say, hey, can I go to lunch with you? Or can I have a coffee or a tea? Most of the times it was 15-minute coffee.
Right.
It was not like every VC gives me an hour-long lunch. It's usually a 15-minute coffee. And that's plenty. And, what I went to them and said is like, hey, here's 6 areas that I think are interesting. What do you think about these areas? And I didn't try to pitch a startup or say like, hey, whatever you're investing in, that's what I'm going to go create a startup in. But it was more conversation about like, hey, you guys see futures and markets and you guys see these things. I only see passion. I only see what I'm interested in solving. Can you help me find the intersection of those two things? Because if I have a passion in something, but there's no money to be had, and I need money to raise in that area, it's stupid to try to start something. So you either have something that you're passionate about that doesn't require venture capital and you can bootstrap it, or you realize, oh, this does need money, so it better be a match with what they're already investing in. And it just so happened, like I love Photoshop, I love Illustrator, I love Sketch, I love so many of these tools. But they all fell short for what I wanted. I wanted to go all the way to production because I didn't want to code. I mean, I knew how to code, but I didn't want to code. My passion was in design. So I'm like, what if there was a tool that, just actually was live the entire time you're working in it, and it was generating a progressive web app or a video or whatever I wanted. It would be producing it live as I was designing, but it felt like sort of Keynote meets Sketch meets Photoshop. And so I would check some ideas I had in music. I had ideas in photography. I had ideas in design. I had ideas all over the artistic world space. And I heard definitively from VCs that they hated the music space. They were like, no, not interested. They hated photography. They hated most of the areas that I loved, except for design. They're like, we think design is going to get disrupted in a massive way. We think that Adobe has the potential to be moving too slow and not seeing the market. And the market's going to change, and maybe Adobe doesn't see it. And there's going to be an opening, as great as Adobe is, and favorite design software in the world, we think there's some things they're not seeing, and there's going to be an opening for some new people to come in there and take on the incumbents. And I was like, wow, okay, so you think there's going to be money for design? And they're like, yeah. So I went to VC after VC after VC after VC, and what I found is every VC was saying the same thing. And it's funny, you could triangulate it that way. And they also told me other things that they thought were red hot spaces that was a total snooze fest for me. But going there and saying like, so I either have the option of maybe bootstrapping a music company, right? And doing a new type of sampler or a new type of digital audio workstation, or raising VC money and going after the design space. I'm like, okay, those are my two areas that I think actually are real opportunities. Which one do I want to do more? And then I began the second thing. So I decided design. Then I'm like, all right, next thing is find a co-founder. I'm somewhat technical. A lot of people think I'm some brilliant engineer. I'm not. I'm much more of a product person, design person that is an absolute danger to the coding world. But I know engineering, and I know architecture, and I know what's possible and what's not. But I always have a super strong coder partner. So I began looking, and I always go, I want new. I want someone that's disruptive, someone that's not going to accept the way the world it is. So I always demand young there as much as I can. For PowerSet, it wasn't Barney, it was Lorenzo. Lorenzo was my super young, brilliant engineer that I wanted to partner with. Mm-hmm. And for Famous, I started at UC Berkeley, and I always start with donating my time and volunteering. It's the great way to pay it forward, and it pays you right back. So I volunteered doing lectures to engineering students and lectures to business students, engineering students about business students about engineering at UC Berkeley, which is a grand total of a mile away from my house. And I said, sure, I'll start judging some of the hackathons, and I'll look for people there. And there's this one kid that was beyond super socially awkward, and nobody wanted to partner with him. And he was winning every hackathon, while not even trying. And I was like, there he is. And prior to that, I'd done all sorts of crazy things. I sent an email out to the UC Berkeley engineering students, and I said, hi, my name's Steve Newcomb, starting up a new company. Who wants to line up and try to be my co-founder? And I had 50 kids apply.
Wow.
But the way I found Mark is in the hackathons, and he's just socially awkward with people and was awkward to talk to him, but I'm not. I love talking to people like that. And they're comfortable talking to me. We jam. I'm the bumblebee to that flower. Yeah. So I start talking to Mark, and we just start enjoying each other's company. And I'm like, let's just start coding together on whatever. And we ended up building the periodic table, which has become this famous demo. It was the demo I used to raise money. And we just said, let's have stuff whizzing around in 3D in a browser in ways that are just entirely unexpected, and prove that you could do Adobe inside of a browser. And we did it. And next thing you know, the VP of engineering at Apple is showing us on the main stage of WWDC and saying, hey, famous guys, I hope you fix your battery problem. And then all of a sudden, everybody wanted to give us money. And then we were invited to TechCrunch Disrupt. And then it was just me and Mark and this guy, Andrew De Andrade. And next thing you know, we'd raised $26 million. And it wasn't because of any presentation. Right. It was the demo and a few of the right people in the world seeing it. And we had 100,000 people sign up for Famous just on that little demo. No advertising budget. We didn't raise any money, didn't ask for anything. And so when we finally did raise money, I was like, well, we have 100,000 pre-sign-ups. And, any investor's like, what?
That sparks some interest.
Yeah, okay. We got Reid Hoffman to invest, the founder of LinkedIn, Naval Ravikant, founder of AngelList, and then Naval gave me his original office for AngelList. That's what we're in right now.
Oh, wow.
Did you guys know that?
That's some history.
No.
This was... I
did read that somewhere.
We have 5 paddocks, and one of them was AngelList. The one you're in right now was Britt of Britt & Co.'s old living room.
Wow.
So this was Britt & Co.'s paddock.
A beautiful spot to be.
So we, coded for, 6 months in an abandoned Korean Baptist church with no heat before we ever raised any money or did anything. Before that, we were in my basement. So we wanted to make sure we had something demonstrable, a piece of thing to show people, look, this is it. And then we came with 100,000 signups and that thing, and then raised money.
We were on that list, and also for our listeners, go check out this demo today. Even back in the day, I remember it was pushing 60 frames a second on super modest hardware. You know, the iPhone 4, I think it was at the time, or, you know.
And building that early momentum seems to have been something that just kind of naturally came. Fundraising initial stages, it sounds like it just due to the hard work, the grit, which is kind of a commonality between successful entrepreneurs, is that hustle factor, the grit, the hard working, and just being, as you said, passionate about what you're doing. Can you tell us the strategy where the shift on raising money? I think that's a hot topic, especially around now where we are in the tech scene. Everyone's trying to raise money, but the strategy, I think, is really where it comes into play. Could you hit on some of those strategies that you did when you had to go out and hustle for it?
Yeah, I mean, 99% of it is the setup and not the pitch.
Yeah.
I avoid no's like the plague. I don't want anyone to ever say no to me. And so I am so much preparing for the pitch that, just like in a boardroom, you already want to know where the votes are going, and there's no surprises in a boardroom. That thing's already done before you enter the room. If you don't already know you're going to have a yes before you enter that room, then don't go in the fucking room. And I've done it many times where I'm like, I think I got a yes, so I'm going to go in there. And I'm like, fuck, I don't have a yes. And it's never good to get a no, because VCs talk to each other. Yeah. And you get one VC saying, hey, have you heard of Famous? And then they say, yeah, we passed. And I felt, prey to that exact same thing in Famous, because we pivoted, and then we got a whole bunch of no's for a while. But the way we did the A and the B in Famous when we had all that momentum is, if you want to have an elevator pitch that's so fucking crisp and clean that everyone's just like, of course I'm going to invest. And my investor pitch was, I'd hand them in the iPad, and what was on that iPad was originally a periodic table, but by the time we got to A, I rebuilt Facebook in Famous, the native app, but in Famous. And I said, here's, and I'd have an iPad and an iPhone, and I'd be like, here is this, and they're like, why are you showing me Facebook? This is boring. I'm like, it's the native app for Facebook, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, no, it's not. It's completely fake. It's completely all on the web. And I did Twitter, and we did Spotify, we did a whole bunch of things like that, and I just hand them that. And I said, oh, by the way, Reid Hoffman's an investor, Naval Ravikant's an investor, my co-founders at PowerSet are investors. And I just start naming off all the people involved in this. And oh, by the way, we have 100,000 users. And oh, by the way, if you want to see the original video, you just type in Hello World 3D into YouTube, and you'll see the original YouTube video where we filmed an iPad 1 with 1% battery, floating objects around 60 frames per second. And I'd be like, I'm done. Like, you can decide whether you want to invest. That should be enough. Like, let's talk if you're interested. And I did this in as humble a way as possible. I sometimes, when I retell the story, it sounds much more bravado than possible. It's really just like, hey, these are the facts. This is where we are. I'm not, and then I would specifically pick my VCs and say, like, look, I'm not really pitching anybody else. When I raised my Series A, I picked two VCs that I deeply respected, which was True Ventures and Javelin, for my A. I really wanted a good, specific VC that was focused on A, that knew how to do A really well. And then in B, I wanted to choose a VC that did B really well. And in all of these cases, I only ever talked to the founding general partner of the fund. So with Javelin, it was Jed Katz. With Insight, it was Jerry Murdoch. And I learned that through the Breakfast Club. I had learned that if you're talking to a founding general partner and you're going through tough times, you're likely to get much more support because they are the founding general partner of that VC. If they're maybe a junior partner, maybe a first-time partner, they're going to have nerves and get nervous and maybe do things differently than a founding general partner who is seasoned. Just like a seasoned entrepreneur is different. So I'm like, I don't want any noobs on my board of directors. And so when we went to Javelin, we already had a lot of momentum. And then one of the other reasons I picked Jed is he's a graduate of UC Berkeley, where I was a senior fellow. So he knew all the teachers I was working with. I'm like, yeah, go talk to the teachers. They all know Famous. When I met Jerry Murdoch, I did not pitch 60 VCs. I literally, at Series B, I only pitched Jerry, and I was done. He gave me a good valuation, said he wanted to be a good partner, said, here's the support I'll give you. And I'm like, good enough. And so this notion that I hear people doing, like road shows where they're taking a term sheet and going shopping with it, you got to have a relationship of trust with your board. And if you're dating someone, yet you're shopping yourself around while you're dating them, like how can that other person really trust you?
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same with VCs. Like you should build that based on trust and trying to go after the highest evaluation. You should be going after who's going to be your best partner. And so I try to do that as much as possible. And Peter Thiel really beat that into us at PowerSet. If anytime me and Barney, he caught us optimizing for evaluation, which we did a lot, he would chew us out. He's like, this is not the right way to build a company. It's the right way to maybe you get rich, not the right way to build a company. And I really took that to heart, and I still make mistakes on it and have it at Famous, where we had, quite frankly, ridiculous valuations when it was just me and Mark. And I actually have now corrected that myself, actually since the last time I saw you guys.
Really?
I personally reset the valuation of the company so that it was more accurate to be where it should be. And I'm not sure I've met another founder that's ever done that on their own accord. They're usually forced in some way. Yeah. And I enjoy accuracy. It makes me feel comfortable. It's to me, if I'm not accurate, I'm living a lie. And so, I am very critical on myself and the valuation that I think Famous deserves. And so, I make sure that our valuation is appropriate for where we are and the stage we're at, and if possible, low, so that we remain attractive for future investors. So we went through it all. We were super hot, had crazy valuations through A and B. Then we had to go through a pivot, and then everybody hated us and thought we were dead, and they loved writing stories about, oh my God, look at this disaster. And frankly, I think TechCrunch only likes to write either unicorn wonder stories or disaster stories, and we had the rare ability to be both, and maybe 3 times. We were a unicorn, then we fell on our face, and
can you hit on that
we're wildly now becoming a unicorn again. Well, the falling on my face bit.
Sure.
The
pivot, we'll call it.
Well,
first pivot.
I pivoted away from my passion. As I said, my passion was art. And we became wildly popular very, very quickly. And the board thought there was a better opportunity in open source because at the time, Docker was happening. At the time, Meteor.js was happening, 3.js. Facebook React was happening. Angular 1 and 2 were happening. Node was happening. I was on the board of jQuery. I was on the board of Node. I was the largest financial individual backer of Node and jQuery, I think. I gave $250,000 to both.
Wow.
But I'm not an open source guy. I believe in it in terms of I'm glad those things exist, therefore I help them. But for me, for art and open source that's kind of a weird marriage. And the board was pressuring me, saying, go do open source. You've got, you guys were part of the early engineering. We had a lot of engineers like, oh my God, I want to code like Famous codes.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we did this little thing where we released Famous.js, and we showed people how we do this coding. It was like, how do you get 60 frames per second on a freaking iPad 1 with 1% battery? We're like, oh, here's how you do it. And we were like the only cats in town who had figured it out for a while. And I was just like, hey, let's just share knowledge and let's open source our core rendering engine. Next thing you know, we had 500,000 engineers using our open source project. And I was like, me and Mark were like, fuck. Like, we don't want to run an open source company. Like, fuck. And then, the board's like, hey, this is great. Let's go in this direction. And I'm like, yeah, there's lots of money there. That could be great. I don't want to do that. Not my passion. Maybe a good other startup idea for somebody else. But I was a coward, and I did it. I didn't stay true to my passions, and we did it. We ended up doing it for 2 years, and we were wildly popular, just like Docker was back in the day. All these things were wildly popular, and we were too. We had our first JavaScript meetup had 800 people. Our second had 1,200 people show up. It was ridiculous. I had like engineers on BART asking me for my autograph. And I'm a socially awkward person to begin with, so imagine that scenario. Like I was like, you have no idea like how I don't feel I should be giving you my signature. Like that's weird. Like I do not deserve this in any way. And all the while I'm like, I'm living a lie in my mind.
Well, I was going to ask you for a signature on my chest later, but I guess I won't.
But it was, I felt I was living a lie. I was not going after my passion. I was going after the optimum business plan, which eats you alive. And that's why that's what I say to my older and younger self. I don't remember which one it was, but both, like, stay true. And I finally got to the point where I'm talking with Mark, and I actually went to Jed and tried to resign. I was like, I'm not your guy. I can't do this open source stuff, and I like broke down. And, and Jed was just like, stop being a victim and be your own man. And I'm like, well, if I'm my own man, then I need to pivot back to my passion. I mean, how many founders pivot away and then back? And he's like, I'm not aware of anybody yet. And I'm like, well, I'm a trailblazer. Can I really go back? And it entailed going back to the 3 people that were passionate about the design. And so I had 36 employees, and we had like 30 Hack Reactor students in the area, the downstairs that you're in now. And I asked my wife, as I always do, like, can we think about this? And the way I think about things is not normal either, and that's I travel. And I travel on the road. So I'm like, do you mind if we rent an RV? And I think I need to drive until I figure this out. And she's like, Tahoe? And I'm like, Baltimore. And she's like, you want me to drive to Baltimore and back so you can figure out if you want to pivot or not? And I'm like, I think 2 weeks should do it. I think we can do it in 2 weeks. And so I called up our family, who's incredibly a wild family. And I was like, guys, I'm going through this, I timed it so it was during my brother's wedding. It was in Baltimore. And I was like, I'm going through this really rough times. Anybody want to help? And all the cousins came out, and like my brother-in-law joined in the first leg, and we divided it up into legs, and we had a family member like that joined for the ride all the way around. And my cousins are brilliant people, and my brother-in-law is brilliant. And I asked their entire advice, all the way through the country. And I came back and I did the unthinkable. I fired everybody. I kicked all the Hack Reactor students out, and I eventually took the company down to 3 people. It was like we went to like 20, then we went to 10, then we went to 6, and then I went to 3. And TechCrunch, if you go look up the TechCrunch thing, it says we laid off 30% or something. And I still remember calling up the reporter, and I was like, you got it all wrong. He's like, no, we have it here. You laid off people. I'm like, no, dude, I fired everybody. I'm like, you underreported it.
Accuracy again.
And he's like, well, I don't know what to do with that. Normally people tell me the opposite. No one ever tells me that I underreported a layoff. And I'm like, you did. You missed it. It's a complete reboot. And we rebuilt from the ground up. And it was a defining moment in my life for me to admit how wrong I was. And I tried to help everybody get jobs, and they were all killer engineers. It literally took like a day for most of them to get jobs. Facebook benefited massively, I think. But I decided not to try to convince any of those engineers who were passionate about open source to have my passion. I just said, I literally lined everybody up, just handed them their, pink slips one after another. And Sarah, who you saw upstairs, was the one that did it with me. She went through this with me.
And you have a quite lively group of folks upstairs now.
Yeah. they're super passionate, and now we found people that, you know, when we interview engineers, we're like, what do you think about design? And if they're not like, I'm goo for gaga over design. So we have people from like electronic arts, Autodesk, you know, a lot of people from gaming industry interests and things like that. And we are like, you know, in like the Christmas claymation, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, we're like the land of the misfit toys. Like we're all like just nerdy weird people in weird ways. Like we argue over the specs of elevators in the city, just any lunchtime, you know, discussion is like the most weirdest, like how to overclock a PC to the absolute max and who's broken records. And Mark just broke like a record on the internet for the PC he just built. You know, we've found our roots now, and we're happy, and we have like a little tight family that is our own bunch of weirdness, and we love each other's weirdness now, and it's such a diverse group of people too. It's like people from Russia, people from Ukraine, Egypt, Hungary, Brazil, Canada, Iraq. Like I'm not even sure if we have any Americans. I think two or three.
Wow.
And we have a great mixture of men and women as well. And it's not by any sort of design. It's just like this level of weirdness requires a dispersed recruitment effort because it's hard to find our type of weird.
So on that, actually, I want to talk about during the pivot 2.0, if you will, you had enough runway due to the success of the initial to continue on.
Yeah.
And you have a pretty unique hiring process. Can you run us through how that unique process has kind of gotten you to such a strong cult-like team here today?
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about earlier, that culture starts with action, not words. And we say here that, you know, I say like I see myself as a servant to the team, not them as servants to me. And we start that off with the first touch that candidates have with Famous. And what we do is the first interview that any candidate has is with me, and it is not me interviewing them. It is them interviewing me and me attempting to earn my job from them. Because I believe that choosing a company is a two-way street. And I have to earn my job with them just as much as they earn their job with me. And so we start off with them interviewing me, and it's the power switch is amazing.
Any crazy stories?
Well, they ask, you can learn so much by what a person asks when you give them the power to. Like there's so many things that you end up discovering in those situations. You end up learning who that person is and what they care about, and a lot of times what they fear, especially if they're coming in from out of state and they're like, do you guys have money in the bank? You know, how do you manage money? How do you raise money? Like, and they're all around like, am I safe if I come work here? You know, and they get to ask questions that what they're really asking is like, are you a jerk? Are you sexist? Are you this? Are you that? And the reaction that I have tells all the words that they ever need to know of what type of boss I am, because they start to learn like nothing offends me. Like, go, you deserve to ask this because so many employees are mistreated, abused, like whatever, and go please ask me. And if they see my reaction, then they're like, wow, that was not normal of a reaction. Then we start to create trust, which is essential. And then the second part of their interview, if they talk to the other employees, we start with a passion interview and then a cultural interview. Mm-hmm. We end on technical interview, but we verify a passion match and cultural match first. We verify that I earned my job first. And there's some times where I didn't make the interview, and the person's like, yeah, I think you kind of suck and I don't want to work here. And I'm like, fuck, I need to do better on my next interview.
Right.
And that's happened like once.
Okay.
But the person's like, yeah, I don't agree with these values that you have. And we literally had some people not agreeing with the values that we have. But then a lot of the time in our interview process, we'll find out people aren't like-minded, or they're not a cultural match, or they're just not passionate about design. And we don't bother the engineering team with a technical interview. And then when we do a technical interview, we walk through code together, and we walk through their GitHub code, and they tell a story of their code. Then we show them our source code raw. And we're like, tell us what our source code does. And we tell them nothing about the architecture, nothing about the infrastructure. And we're like, how will you figure out, like, try to get your computer up and running with Famous. And there's no install instructions. And we watch them just read through our code, because if they can read through the code and tell the narrative that we're trying to tell, that's a great start. And then we get into the code and go deeper, and then we go from there and have a more traditional, deep technical dive. And then the other thing we do is we move fast. So we have a 24-hour turnaround with each touch point they have with the company. So they have the 3 touch points. 4. They have 3 touch points, and 24 hours after each, we tell them if they're still in the running. And so I'm the first touch point. The second touch point is actually demo day, where we have our wine tastings and beer tastings, and we share the week's work with each other. We invite them to that because, remember, we're weird, and a lot of us are introverts, and we're socially awkward. So we need a little bit of alcohol in us to even talk to even an interview candidate. There'll be times when an interview candidate comes in and we're all just huddled in the corner afraid to go talk to them. And I'm like, guys, drink a wine and then get your butts over there and talk to them. And then the only questions they have is like, are you a jerk? You know, like, are you nice? Are you going to be nice to me if we work together? But after a few wines and things, people loosen up and they get to talking. And oftentimes we'll have candidates that'll stay 2-3 hours. And we got to watch out and not let them get drunk, because it's nerve-wracking on them too, and everybody's drinking, and you got to be careful with that. But then you open up just a little bit. And where most people fail in the interview process at Famous is at demo day, because the people are like, yeah, that person just isn't going to fit here. They didn't enjoy our elevator conversation. They weren't debating over the proper specs, of a hydraulic lift system with us, or they didn't seem interested, stuff like that.
Right.
And so we try to go 2 weeks all in, but we are always 24 hours, always telling them. And we don't ever pit engineers against each other and say we're going to choose the best. If we're into somebody and we like them, we go with them. And so it's respect, going back to that candidate. And so at the end of that process, then we describe 5 things that we try to do differently. And I touched on some of these, the living wage. We have commissions that we pay to engineers. We do cost of living increases by the mile in the city. So if people want to move closer so they can walk, we pay them the difference it costs to get higher rent to live closer. We check their level a month after they join to see if we made a mistake in their level as an engineer. Just as you heard when I leveled Tom Preston Werner, the founder of GitHub, I leveled him at a level 2 at PowerSet. So guess what? It's almost impossible to level an engineer in an interview. But after you work with them for a month, you can. And then we promise that every level 3 engineer, every level 4 engineer gets paid exactly the same. You don't need to learn how to negotiate. And again, this is your culture through action bits. And when people hear that we do that, they're just like, the culture through action is so important. And I get that a lot from Ben Horowitz. I read a lot and follow a lot. He's a very big, I've never met him. He doesn't know who I am from Adam, but he's a big influencer on me.
Can you walk us through the various stages of raising funding and what your tactics have been with Famous? Some of the things that have worked well and some of the things that haven't worked out quite as well.
Things that work well are just making sure you have momentum, like I mentioned before. All the things like great demo, great traction, and great support before you ever go to a meeting. Things that don't work well, sometimes you'll get existing investors say, meet my other investor. Be careful of that. Because, again, just a simple rule, don't go to an investor unless you pretty much know they're going to say yes, like you've got every duck in a row. But if you're going to meet an investor just because you have the opportunity of meeting an investor, be careful about asking for money. This is the ask for advice, don't ask for money situation. But if you feel like, and this is one thing I've also learned, when I say, so let me actually turn this interview around and ask you guys a question. When I say make sure that you think you're going to get funding, what percentage do you think I'm talking about?
percentage of our ask?
No. When I say make sure you think you're going to get a yes, what percentage surety do you think I'm talking about?
I'd say as much as possible. As close to 100 as you can get.
I've talked to people about this, and I'm like, if I'm 80% sure, that's what I think you're saying to me.
I think it
And
has
I'm like,
to be
no,
all out.
I'm like 97%.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be the exception that they would say no. Otherwise, I would just be very careful about asking for money. Now that I will say there's exceptions to that, especially in later stage funding where you need to build a relationship. So I'm raising Series C right now, and I'm not asking for any money, but I sure am building relationships.
And what are some things that you're doing to build the relationships besides tea and coffee? I mean, are you having dinners and deep conversations about philosophy? I mean, what are your tactics?
No dinners. I target a VC that I want to raise money with because I think they're going to be the perfect partner. So I went in my space of the design space, and I said, who are the top VCs in that space that I think are the best VCs in the world? And I'm like, who hasn't placed their bets yet? And that's my world of my tier one best choices. So let's imagine there's 3 of those in my world. Then I figure out, well, what partner do I want to talk to in that fund? And it's got to be a high-ranking partner, really high, if not founding general partner. Then I find a way to get to that person through a trusted voice. So I just got to get introduced to one of the VCs that's my target, and I called up a former PowerSet employee that was a founder that got funded by that guy, and I said, hey, can you do me a solid and do me an introduction? Not looking for you to represent that I have anything of value, just that you know me from PowerSet. And he did, and that partner took the meeting. And then I said, look, I'm not raising money now. I'm going to be raising money in a year, but it's going to take a year to get to know you. So can I start to meet your team? Not even you. Don't want to waste your time, but can I meet your team and start giving them monthly written updates? And that is what I've been doing with the top 3 VCs is every month I give them like a 3-page update on exactly where we are. And then they critique me saying, you really should be doing this. Your cost of acquisition should really be around this number. I would be impressed if you hit these KPIs. And you start getting the picture around what are your goals?
Yeah.
And so I'm with one of my VCs, I have 5 top KPIs I've worked out with that VC that we really want to hit, and I've already hit 4 of them. And so I know I need to hit the 5th one, and it's the hardest one. But I know what it is. And it's because we've started building a relationship. And so I feel like I can freely email that team at those VCs and give them updates. And they feel free to let me know what's good and what's bad about my update. And it really helps you get a reality picture, a reality check on where you are. And I've yet to ask for a single dime from any of them. And when I go to pitch in the Monday partners meeting at any of those VCs, I will know I'm already at a yes.
Yeah.
And I won't pitch the 3 VCs against each other. I will pick one. If all 3 want me, I will pick one, and I will only go with that one, because that's what you do if you're actually looking to create loyalty in a relationship.
Let's zoom back up just a little bit to product and switching back to Famous. Steve, what would your outlook be on the competitive space with other tools such as Sketch with plugins, Figma, etc., and just kind of the competitive space that is around these, high-end design?
Yeah, I mean, the design space is bubbling and it's awesome. And Figma has collaboration for enterprise. That's sort of their area for design. Sketch is trying to reinvent itself a little bit right now with funding from Benchmark. Figma has funding from Greylock. It has funding from Kleiner. It has, I think Excel is the other one. Can't remember the third one. You have Canva. There's coming in from a very different angle from what we call remixers and curators standpoint, your casual creatives. I don't look at them as competitors. I mean, I laugh when people say, what do you think of your competitors? And they want me to do some rousing hatred story of how we're going to destroy them. They're my brothers in arms. They think they're like me. They're excited about design and they're founders. So I like them. I have a natural affinity with all these people. And I'm like just nothing but happy for them. Now, we all have different perspectives. Famous's thing is we're live from the get-go. That's how we differentiate. And we're super high-end with everything that we do. So that's how we differentiate. Canva, is a wonderful introduction for many people into the design space, and they have 50,000 unique templates to choose from. We're going in a different direction. We're going to have, of course, with my background, semantically tagged templates that are built through AI and machine learning, that use 3D physics to whiz around. That's my jam. Figma's collaboration and design. Sketch is trying to move. Well, frankly, I don't know exactly where Sketch is trying to move. It seems to break a lot on me these days because I know they're replatforming, but I think they're trying to go towards prototyping and things like that. And Adobe has XD. Adobe's trying to do new things. There's Unreal 4 engine, which I follow real closely. There's Unity 3D, which I follow real closely.
Yeah.
And my only comment would be like, I really try to be unique and have my own voice, and I try to make the world a more beautiful place with my own jam. And if people like that, they want to get on board with that, they can. And if Canva's successful, it makes me successful. Like when I hear Canva's valuation, I'm like, go get them.
Yeah.
Because that'll increase my valuation when I succeed. If Figma does well, that helps me do well. If all of your brethren competitors are doing poorly, that means your entire market space sucks. So I want them to do well. I like when I say Sketch, I don't know what Sketch is doing right now. It's because I'm worried about them. I mean, I want them to do well, and I'm like, ugh. They only raised a little bit of money from Benchmark. It wasn't a lot, and I use Sketch every day, and it's breaking on me a lot. And so I'm like, I almost want to help them. Like, how can I help? How can I be here? Like, I don't know, because I use Sketch every day. Adobe, like the launch of XD, was a tough launch, and they've really recovered since and started to really gain ground. And I'm friends with the head of Adobe XD, and I'm like, go, Paul, go. Like, what? Like, I get excited when I talk to them. Yeah. My enemy is complacency. My enemy is people who don't care about quality. My enemy is people who don't. I guess my enemy, my antagonist is people who don't care about design. I care deeply about good design. So it's weird. Like I remember my first startup, I was hating my competitors, and I'd give rousing speeches to my employees, like, "Let's kill them." And now I'm like, that was dumb. Yeah. There are people just like me that enjoy good design. Like I hear the founder of Canva speak, and I'm like, nailed it. Like she nailed. I'm like, I think the same way she does. She's probably the closest of any of the founders that I hear speaking, where I'm just like, I totally agree with like pretty much everything she's saying. I have a different perspective, and perspective is your real competitive weapon, not tech. It's the way you look at the world that's your actual competitive weapon.
Yeah, and it shines through the product through and through because, I mean, here even at Dimension Software, everything that we've been able to build with Famous, I mean, it just sparkles and dazzles, and it's so smooth.
Thank you for that commercial endorsement.
People are very impressed. And on that note, can you give the elevator pitch for what Famous Studios is to the listeners who maybe aren't as technical?
Yeah, I mean, imagine that there was a tool that is as easy to use as like Microsoft Word or Keynote or PowerPoint, but it allowed you to build mobile apps. It allowed you to build mobile websites, allowed you to build Instagram stories. It allowed you to do videos. So you wouldn't have to learn, if any of you have ever opened up Photoshop and seen the 1,000 buttons and then you have the 1,000 button stare. If you've opened up Illustrator and you're like, what the F is a vector, Victor?
Isn't that the truth?
The Twinkie shitting anxiety sets in.
Yeah, I mean, I am the guy that like, I opened up After Effects because I was like, I'm going to do some After Effects because I watched some YouTube videos and got super, confident.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And then I opened it up and I'm like, where's like File New? And then, like, you know, I'm usually the crazy guy that barrels through the tutorials and makes it to the end. And I have made it to the end of all these tutorials. And now I can do amazing things in those products.
What's a
and I'm
key
just
point?
I'm like, who the F wants to do that? Like, I'm a masochist, so I do it, of course. But, like, you know, what it is that people's taste can be very high. You can know what good looks like, but your skill set rarely matches your taste. So you can know what a good photo looks like, but you may not know how to wield a camera. You can know what good design looks like, but you may not be able to how to open up Photoshop and do a damn thing. And this is true in almost every artistic product that exists. So I do my music production as well, but Jesus, the number of tutorials I've had to go through to learn how to do what I do now, I'm like, that would have been my alternative, is to make that easier. Like, how could I score a film like Hans Zimmer with a tool that's as easy as Keynote? That would have been my other idea, and still might be something I eventually do. So I'm the crazy person that does do all the crazy tutorials and does spend the 2,000 hours and the 10,000 hours to become a master at it. But I truly believe there's people with absolutely stunning taste who feel trapped. And they want a bridge between what's in their head and what they can create. And Famous is that bridge. So you get into Famous. We test with 18-year-olds with no description of how it works. And we're like, go create a mobile app that works on your phone. And we tell them, there's no tutorials, nothing. And we're like, just figure it out by clicking around. And if you can't figure it out by clicking around, then we fail. And that's what we always test on. And so you will be able to create mobile apps, you will be able to create videos, you will be able to create VR, AR, you'll be able to create Instagram stories, all the cool stuff that people want to put on the internet. We are finding how to make that easy and fun. And right now, all we have is, and I say all, but you can make mobile apps, mobile experience, websites, anything like that. And we're about to announce we're replacing Keynote and PowerPoint itself.
Wow.
And we're about to announce that you can with one click import every PowerPoint on your hard drive into Famous, store it in the cloud, and convert it to Famous in real time.
Oh, that's incredible.
And so we're trying to make design easy, but keep your taste
high,
equivalent to what's in your imagination. And the things we're about to launch, like we've been working on for years, we're about to announce this thing that we call Famous Cloud. But normally when you publish something to the internet, you have to hit publish. You know, if you think Wix or Squarespace, you hit the publish button, you get spinny thing, and then it goes to their crappy domain, and then you're like, wait a minute, how do I get this on my domain? And then you learn something called a CNAME change, and then you shit a Twinkie over that. You know.
I've had two in this interview already.
We've now, and we're releasing it this Monday, figured out how to publish in real time. So There is no save, there is no publish. It just is, as you type, publishing, and you either make it private or public.
Is that in any way based on how it sort of like loosely syncs up in the dev mode?
Yeah. So we have a thing called Live Preview where you can actually put it on your phone or on your iPad or on your computer and then design live.
Yes.
We took that mode, and that was a one-to-one connection. We had to make that work for 1 million users simultaneously, or many millions. And we figured out how to do it.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's astonishing.
Yeah, we cried a lot during figuring out how to do that. And then we're launching a thing we call Asset Bar. So we want you to be able to drag and drop in photos and videos and anything in real time as well that are actually preconditioned to already be pre-filtered and themed to whatever your theme is that you're in. And so we're getting ready to, I can't give the details, but we're getting ready to announce an incredibly exciting partnership with Getty.
Oh, wow.
Most average humans can't afford Getty content.
Yes.
And we will now. So we're going to make that accessible. And then we're launching something we call Magic Bar. So imagine every effect that you can do in Photoshop and After Effects has been boiled down to about 26 buttons. And you hit one button, and what it's really doing is about 4 hours worth of After Effects work and letting you see the results. So think of Instagram filters was a prehistoric version, and Magic Bar is like booyah,
Right.
you know. And then what's genius in the middle of all that is their theming and templating system. So if you have a theme or template, we call it one of our themes and templates called Froze All Day. And it's a pink theme, but it's a lifestyle theme. And everything that you do automatically rejiggers itself to your theme. So the notion of a style guide we've hit the turbo button on it. So even your 3D physics engine adapts to your theme. Even every one of your effects filters automatically modifies almost like a color imprint inside of Lightroom.
Wow.
So these are very super high. What we're doing is taking the techniques that the super high-end pros use. You saw Mike, he came down here. We're literally machine learning Mike. And so
you can fire him, right?
We have a lot to learn. There's a lot of Mike to learn from.
I'm sure.
It's all about taking something that used to take 3 hours and 1,000 clicks and like a lot of tutorials to learn, and being a curator and saying, oh, I'm going to click this button and see what it does. And you're like, amazing. And you're like, click one. And then you get done and you're curating instead of creating from scratch. And that's an important notion in what we do. And the end all be all is that it empowers people. And, you know, because we're so cheap, we have a free product and we're coming out with a $12.95 a month product, and we work in a browser. It is amazing to talk to people in like India that have a career because of us. And that's why we're getting so many more people using Famous than we ever thought, like people in Eastern Europe, people in Brazil, people in China, people like all over the world that couldn't afford Adobe, didn't have like got scared of all the buttons in Photoshop, even if they could afford it. And they look at Famous and they're just like, I've been playing with this free thing for 10 minutes and I just blew my own mind away. And we get customer calls, because I do at least one a week, where like some 19-year-old kid is like, I just won a major contract with Adidas. Like I pitched them with Famous and I freaking won. And then they pay me to like deliver. And I'm like, no, I'm already done. And they're like, what I showed you is the finished product. And then Adidas is like, what the F are you talking about? Don't we need coders to like code up this fake prototype?
That's incredible.
And then people are like, it's not a fake prototype. It is real. Here's your URL. Now pay me the $25,000.
Right.
And, you know, I do these videos of taking a project that took $300,000 and I do it. And I challenge myself to finish it in under 2 minutes in Famous. And I got in a lot of trouble on one of them with Starbucks. But I love seeing that disruption, that change, and that's what Famous is all about, is making great design easy and empowering and giving people, like imagine you had taste, but you didn't want to learn those 1,000 buttons, and now you have something. You could live a different life as a result. You could have a different career. You could be independent in a way that you never were before. And when I talk to people, that's when I shit a good Twinkie, you know. And that's the magic of what I love.
We're going to definitely be excited to keep in touch with you and the Famous journey, and we'll be linking all the Famous information to our users and anyone listening that would be interested in using a tool like this. Extremely impactful and very, very awesome. So we know this from firsthand. It's a front-facing aspect of Dimension Software's business. You know, you hit the link on our phones, scan our QR code, and it takes you to our Famous, beautiful rendering of Famous of Dimension Software, and it's a very impactful tool. Creates a lot of excitement. We've noticed that with a lot of people, and we'll be definitely continuing to use it over the other products.
Yeah, and congratulations on all those announcements.
And then one last topic that we'd like to get your thoughts on, pick your brain dry, as you said, is psychedelics real quick. It's a little twist. Tim Ferriss, as you know and probably have heard of around this area, he's been very openly spoken about his use in microdosing, and he's actually even gotten funding to open up kind of the first psychedelic research center, trying to cure treatments for TBI, traumatic brain injuries, PTSD, and just overall biohacking in a way. What are your thoughts on microdosing, and especially being in Silicon Valley here? It's been widely known to be used in high performers and billionaires and things like that. So I'm wondering if you've tried it or experimented or had people around you that have, and what are your thoughts on it?
I think that it's no different than anything else in the space of being an explorer, a learner, a trier of new things. And I always say that there's danger in doing that. There's risk, and there's potentially mistakes that you could make. But like I say to everyone upstairs all the time, like, I'd rather be on stage throwing up than be sitting in the audience any day of the week. And so when Tim Ferriss is talking about things like that, he's just talking about saying, let's evolve, let's learn, let's try something new. Let's not have opinions on something without data. He's always about gathering data and relentlessly gathering data. And sometimes he falls on his face while trying to gather data, but he gathered the data and then he learns from it. And so, can we open up new pathways in our brains? Can we learn about our brains in ways that we have never learned before? Sure. Why wouldn't we be able to? Like my co-founder always says, why not? Is there any reason not to try to do this? And for me, any type of microdosing, I would only apply that to music. And imagine if I was in some of my music is sort of like Radiohead meets a full orchestra, and in those moments, I would be fascinated to see what happens, because a lot of my music is incredibly mathematical, and I know that if I get drunk or my social anxiety goes away, my math brain actually excels dramatically, because I was a math nut early on. And so I think that it's all on these. I'd rather be on stage throwing up than sitting in the audience watching the show. I'd rather be the show. And I think Tim is saying he wants to learn in this area. He's always experimenting with his own body or mind.
Absolutely.
And I just see him as an explorer and a learner, and just as perhaps, to many people, a misfit as I am. Like we people that think that way are generally misfits to people who drive Hondas. I don't drive a Honda. I'll drive a self-driving flying helicopter / motorcycle, and probably wreck into the water and maybe die, but I'd rather do that. And I think that's where Tim's going with that. And would I do it myself personally? If Tim had data on it that made me interested, then yeah. But I'll let him be the explorer on that. And just like, I don't know if he would put himself in the position of building design software.
Solid.
Last bit of advice to end and wrap this lengthy conversation up, and we really appreciate your time and effort, and sharing all these valuable insights to us and to everyone that'll be listening to this. Imagine that you're early in your startup career and you have all the tough situations and moments ahead of you. What advice would you give that young entrepreneur, that young Steve or anyone else that's out there wanting to start a business or currently doing so in a weird position? What wisdom would you shed and light on the right direction to be taking in this very moment?
I think that one of the things that I asked my co-founder, because he's a real young guy when we started, he hadn't graduated yet, undergrad. But about 4 years in, I'm like, Mark, what do you think? You know, you're a young kid out of UC Berkeley, like we're valued over 100 million, like. And Mark, like me, and he's on a different part of it, but he's on the spectrum, you know, and he's got his own things, and we both love our own weirdness. And Mark's very accurate in anything he says. And what he said to me is like, he said, my confidence in myself has remained constant. And while I've met some of the biggest luminaries in the world, my confidence in the rest of the world has declined precipitously. And it just cracks me up because the real road to learning and growing and succeeding is an inward journey, not an outward one. So, you know, as you meet these famous founders and famous VCs, and if you look at them and say, like, they're amazing, they're great, I'm going to listen to them, don't even listen to me in some ways. If it doesn't ring true, like, to your innards, then fuck it. Like, do your own thing. Like, there could be stuff I'm saying that people are like, that fucking, I don't like that at all. So, and if you hear me say something and it's maybe you're just like, well, I don't think that way, but I guess that's true. No. And if you can be your own unique voice, that's the key to be true to yourself, and that's the key to happiness. And it's also the key to excelling in your company, because then you'll try harder. You're able to take pain harder. You're able to go through tough times much more if it's meaningful to you and only you. So don't try to impress other people, and don't be impressed by people from Harvard or people from fancy named VCs. Be impressed by data. Be impressed by your own passion and your own ability to stay true, even when the world is pushing you around and trying to make you go where they want you to go. And, you know, I always rest at night, and whenever I'm you know, trying to remind myself of my accomplishments, all I have to do is say to myself is like, I could die now and I'm kind of happy. But if you say to yourself, if I died right now, would I have unfinished business? Then you're not living right, because you should have all your business finished at all times. And if you have stuff lying out there where it's unfinished, it's almost always because you're not being true to yourself. So for those young people that are like trying to create a startup, be unafraid of failure in the eyes of others, and be very afraid of failure in the eyes of yourself. Because if you fail yourself and you're not true to yourself, then like, what the fuck are you doing? Don't try to be rich. Don't have a goal of being rich. Have a goal of, you know, the work is the reward, and that'll bring you a lot more happiness than having visions of driving a Porsche, having visions of being a baller and people looking up to you about how much money you have, or buying some ginormous freaking house. You know, value your success based on how high you help others rise, not how you help yourself rise. And your own intrinsic value to yourself will be your reward.
Amen to that. He's a man made of pure grit. He's introspective, wise, and which has made him dangerously effective leader. He's created the Internet 3.0. There are dreamers and there are doers, ladies and gentlemen. He is both and much, much more. Steve, thanks for coming on the show and having us here at your famous studios in San Francisco.
Thanks for having me. Happy to do it, and hope some people got some good stuff out of this.
Thank you for all the delicious software.
And please, if you like what we're producing, smash that subscribe button, leave a rating and a comment. And if you don't, do similarly. We want honest feedback, because at the end of the day, we're here to produce the best show possible for you, our listeners. I'm your host, Ben, and this is Call to Action Podcast, Command Q.